She went to 2 rehabs. The last one, I put her in against her will, and she hated me for it.
I said, no, this really is. I got your letter today, and we're thinking about coming to see you tonight in the contest. Are you happy with what you're doing?
Carol Burnett seemed to love everyone she worked with. But there was one co-star who crossed a line she couldn't forget. During the 7th season of her hit show, this person's behavior turned ugly. They humiliated guest stars in front of the whole cast. When Carol tried to stop it, things got physical. What happened next shocked everyone on set. This co-star had been with her for years, but their betrayal cut deep. The truth about who it was will surprise you. Carol Burnett was born on April 26, 1933, in a crumbling hospital in San Antonio. Her birth certificate didn't even list an address. Her parents were already deep into alcoholism. By the time she turned 4, both were drinking every day. Her mother's rage often turned violent. Carol would hide under beds to escape the shouting. Neighbors brought food because her parents wouldn't. Looking back, Carol called it survival, not childhood. She remembered a constant sense of loneliness. Statistically, kids in homes like that rarely escape, but Carol did. Her parents' marriage didn't last long. Her father walked out when she was just 2. By 6, the divorce was final. The court blamed drunkenness and neglect. Carol sat through some of the hearings. She later said it made her feel invisible. Her mother stayed bitter. Her father moved to Los Angeles and drank even more. Still, Carol somehow learned to observe everything. Years later, that helped her build characters that felt real on stage. After the divorce, Carol and her half-sister Chrissy were sent to live with their grandmother. They ended up in a tiny windowless room in a rundown Hollywood boarding house. Rent was $9 a week. Their bathtub was down the hall, shared with other tenants. Mice ran across the floor at night. They lived on her grandmother's Social Security checks, $30 a month. Carol made toys from broken furniture. She read books others threw away. She went to free radio tapings just to feel some joy. In 1941, Los Angeles County said 7% of children were considered neglected. Carol easily could have been one of them. At 8 years old, something strange happened. Carol invented a twin sister named Karen. Karen had curly blonde hair and perfect dimples. Carol would run out the front door, change outfits behind the building, and come back as Karen. She kept this going for almost 2 years. She even invited Karen to a birthday party once. One neighbor wrote to her grandmother suggesting she needed help. But to Carol, it was her first try at improvisation. She didn't just make up stories, she acted them out. That was the beginning of something bigger. By 9, she was practicing her Tarzan yell on the rooftop. She copied the jungle call from old movies, yelling until neighbors came running. Sometimes police even showed up. She didn't stop. Over time, her voice got stronger. Her lungs stretched. When fans called out Tarzan during her show years later, she could do it on command without missing a beat. It had started as escape. It became her trademark. Survival didn't stop at yelling. Her grandmother had a habit when they went to the movies. After the film, she'd quietly take toilet paper from the theater bathroom and stuff it into her purse. They couldn't afford to buy their own. Carol never forgot those moments. Years later, she'd laugh about it. But at the time, it wasn't funny. It was what kept them going. Movies were more than escape. For Carol, they were school. For a dime, she'd sit through double features. She studied the actors, the timing, the way scenes flowed. She paid attention to how the audience reacted. When she built her comedy later, It came from those dark theaters. She even parodied Gone with the Wind on her show, pulling straight from those early memories. Those movie houses taught her everything. Back in their little kitchen, music brought moments of peace. Her grandmother played piano. Her mother sometimes picked up a ukulele. They sang songs like "You Are My Sunshine." On those nights, it didn't matter how poor they were. Carol learned to harmonize at that kitchen table. It gave her the confidence to sing in front of others. That spark would grow into the musical sketches she became known for. One moment stuck with her forever. She told her mother she wanted to be an actress. Her mother looked at her and said, "You can always write, no matter what you look like." Carol remembered the words exactly. God, that hurt. In that moment, she realized her own mother didn't believe in her looks. But instead of breaking her, it drove her. She built a career that proved talent mattered more than beauty. She gave a voice to people who didn't fit the mold. By the early 1950s, her father was barely surviving. Alcohol had taken everything from him. Carol left for New York in 1954 to chase her dream. Not long after, her father died at 47. His liver had given up. Carol said he was never mean, just lost. As her life was just beginning, his was already over. In 1954, Carol Burnett was just a junior at UCLA, unsure of what the future held. She was preparing for her final theater exam when her professor canceled it without warning. Instead of a test, he asked her and a few classmates to perform skits at a party for other faculty members. It felt more like a joke than a gift. Carol had been worrying about her finances and wondering if she'd ever get a real shot at acting. But that unexpected night changed everything. She threw together a comedy sketch on the spot and performed it in front of an audience of professors. Their laughter wasn't polite. It was real. For the first time, she saw adults in positions of power respond to her humor. What she didn't know was that someone in the crowd had been watching her very closely. After the performance, Carol did something she would later laugh about with embarrassment. She began quietly slipping cookies into her purse. She wasn't being greedy. She was just hungry. Food was often a struggle, and she wanted to take something back to her grandmother. Just as she was stuffing the last few cookies, an older man in a suit walked up to her. She froze. She thought he might call her out or make her leave. But instead, he complimented her performance and started a conversation. That awkward moment over cookies ended up being the key to a door she didn't even know existed. The man turned out to be a wealthy shipbuilder from La Jolla, and what he offered was almost too good to believe. He gave Carol and her friend Dawn Soroyan a loan of $1,000 each. No interest, no catch, except one. The money had to be used to go to New York and chase their dreams. In today's money, it would be nearly $12,000. For two broke students, it was life-changing. This man, whose name Carol never revealed, asked for no credit, no public thanks. But his act of generosity became the foundation of Carol's career. There were 3 conditions. First, the money had to be repaid within 5 years. Second, his identity must remain a secret forever. Third, if they found success, they had to help other young artists the same way. Carol took the deal without hesitation. There was no contract, just a handshake and a promise. And she never broke it. She paid him back exactly 5 years later. She never told anyone who he was. And once she made it, she quietly gave back through scholarships and secret gifts to struggling performers. That one conversation over cookies created a ripple that never stopped. With the money in hand, Carol and Dawn did something most people thought was foolish. They dropped out of UCLA. It was 1954. Women weren't expected to leave school to chase dreams in show business. But they packed their things and took the train to New York. They used the loan for rent and auditions, living in a small apartment and eating cheap meals. For years, the struggle continued. But in 1959, just 4 years later, Carol landed the role that would turn her into a star. She played Princess Winifred in the Broadway show Once Upon a Mattress. The musical had started in a small off-Broadway theater, but moved to Broadway because the audiences couldn't get enough. Carol's performance was funny, fearless, and full of heart. She was just 26 years old, and her name was suddenly on everyone's lips. She earned a Tony nomination and stayed with the show for its 470-performance run. Years later, she would bring the role to television, cementing it as one of her most beloved characters. By the time she returned the $1,000 in 1959, she had made good on every part of her promise. She marked the exact day the loan was due. She tracked down the man who had believed in her before anyone else did. He smiled, took the money back, and disappeared again. Carol kept the rest of the deal too. She never gave up his name. And she made sure to help others, just like he helped her. That story, buried beneath her fame, shows the quiet thread that runs through her entire career. That same year, she joined The Gary Moore Show. It was a weekly variety program taped at CBS Studio 50, now known as the Ed Sullivan Theater. Carol was just 26, sharing the stage with veterans of comedy and music. But it didn't take long for her to become the standout. Her sketch work, especially her cleaning woman character, showed off her range. She could be silly, sad, loud, or quiet, whatever the moment needed. The show ran until 1962, and during those years, Carol built the muscles she would later flex on her own show. She also met producer Joe Hamilton, who would become her husband and one of her biggest collaborators. In 1962, her talent was finally recognized with her first Emmy Award. She won for Outstanding Performance in a variety or musical program. It wasn't just her first big award. It was a signal that the industry finally saw her as a leader in comedy. She had been in hundreds of sketches by then, and her name was becoming familiar in homes across America. That Emmy was the start of an extraordinary run. By 2024, she had earned 7 Emmys out of 25 nominations. But that first one mattered the most. It showed her that taking risks and staying true to her voice could actually lead somewhere. Also in 1962, Carol teamed up with Julie Andrews for a special that would become legendary. Julie and Carol at Carnegie Hall aired in June and pulled in more than 17 million viewers. It was a mix of music, parody, and sketch comedy. The chemistry between the two women was electric. At the time, executives didn't believe the special would work, but it became a hit almost overnight. It won 2 Emmy Awards, one for the show and one for Carol herself. For many fans, it was their first time seeing Carol as more than a sketch comic. She could sing, act, and hold her own on a national stage. That performance didn't just raise her profile, it launched her into the top tier of entertainers. Carol Burnett married Don Saroyan on December 15, 1955. She was just 22. They had met in college 3 years earlier, long before her face became familiar on television screens. At the time, Burnett was still struggling in New York, taking whatever job she could find, working as a hat check girl, living paycheck to paycheck. Saroyan was also trying to break into acting, but neither of them had found a clear path. Their marriage unfolded in the shadows of small apartments and unpaid bills. It wasn't until 1962 that Burnett's life changed almost overnight, when Julie and Carol at Carnegie Hall aired and won an Emmy. That same year, their marriage ended. They finalized their divorce on September 25th, just as her career was taking off. It was a split that reflected how success doesn't always arrive with peace. Only a few months later, on May 4, 1963, she married Joe Hamilton, a television producer who had worked on her Carnegie Hall special. Their relationship was part love story, part showbiz merger. Hamilton had 8 children from a previous marriage, which he ended the same day he married Burnett in Mexico. Together, they would have 3 daughters, bringing the household total to 11 kids. The house was always full of voices, movement, and schedules. Burnett would later describe those years as both joyful and chaotic. In public, she was the calm and funny host. At home, she was navigating packed dinner tables and back-to-back school events while juggling scripts and costumes. The reality behind the laughter was non-stop work. Their first daughter, Carrie, was born on December 5, 1963. Jody followed on January 18, 1967. Then Erin arrived on August 14, 1968. But not all pregnancies ended with joy. In early 1965, Burnett had a miscarriage at just 9 weeks. She kept that pain private, even as her star kept rising. But the deepest heartbreak came much later. Carrie struggled with addiction from the age of 13. After years of trying to help her through recovery, Burnett lost her in 2002. Carrie was only 38 when she died from pneumonia brought on by cancer. The public often saw only the comedy. They didn't see the sleepless nights, the hospital visits, or the quiet grief that followed. Joe Hamilton wasn't just her husband. He was the producer behind The Carol Burnett Show, which debuted in 1967. That show would become one of the most influential comedy variety series in TV history. But while building that success, Hamilton was also trying to manage a family of 11 kids. Mornings started with breakfast chaos. Evenings ended with production meetings. The pressure built up year after year. And after nearly 2 decades of marriage, they separated. Their divorce was finalized in 1984. Behind their creative partnership was a reality filled with deadlines, emotional exhaustion, and heartbreak. Their story showed how even the most successful lives come with heavy trade-offs. Before her breakthrough, Burnett had taken whatever roles came her way. In 1955, she played the girlfriend of a ventriloquist dummy on The Paul Winchell and Jerry Mahoney Show. In 1962, she played a guardian angel in an episode of The Twilight Zone, which was supposed to be a pilot but never took off. In between, she was Buddy Hackett's awkward girlfriend on Stanley and a contestant on early game shows like Pantomime Quiz. These parts were odd and sometimes forgettable, but they slowly built her reputation. When her 1962 special finally aired, it looked like an overnight success. But it had taken nearly a decade of strange gigs and small moments to get there. Everything changed on September 11, 1967. CBS didn't want Burnett to host her own variety show. They suggested a generic sitcom instead, something called Here's Agnes. But Burnett had a clause in her contract from earlier work that let her create 1 season of any show she wanted. She activated it just in time. The Carol Burnett Show went on to air 279 episodes over 11 years. It was filmed at CBS Television City's Studio 33 and became a landmark in television history. No woman had hosted a primetime variety show before. Burnett broke the rule, set the standard, and never looked back. The show began with something no one expected. Burnett would walk out and take questions from the audience. This started by accident. A producer once sent her out early as a joke, but the audience loved it, and it became a regular feature. People asked her anything, how she got started, who her favorite co-stars were, or begged to hear her famous Tarzan yell. Burnett answered with charm and honesty, creating a sense of connection that few TV shows ever achieved. Even today, in her live shows, she keeps the tradition alive. Those unscripted moments became one of the most memorable parts of her career. She didn't just perform, she created characters that lived far beyond the screen. There was the charwoman, a quiet janitor with a mop and a dream. Then came Eunice, the loud, frustrated daughter from the Family Sketches, who later starred in her own show, Mama's Family. Burnett's face was as expressive as any comedian's toolbox. She could stretch it into sadness, surprise, or joy, all in a single second. Parodies of famous films like Went with the Wind showed just how far her humor could go. These sketches didn't just make people laugh, they shaped what TV comedy could be. The awards followed. Over 11 seasons, the show won 25 Primetime Emmys from 70 nominations. It won Outstanding Variety Series 3 times. Few shows in history have matched that level of acclaim. Burnett herself became so iconic that the Golden Globes created a Lifetime Achievement Award in her name. She received it while still living, a rare honor. Her cast members, like Tim Conway and Harvey Korman, often stole the spotlight during acceptance speeches with impromptu comedy that blurred the line between real life and performance. Their moments on stage were funny, touching, and unforgettable. But Burnett never worked alone. She chose her cast carefully. Harvey Korman had already proven himself on The Danny Kaye Show. Vicki Lawrence was a teenager who sent Burnett a fan letter and ended up becoming one of her strongest performers. Lyle Waggoner, who had once auditioned for Batman, became the show's announcer and straight man. Tim Conway, originally a guest, joined full-time in 1975. He became known for stretching out sketches with perfectly timed silences and stumbles. Together, they made TV magic. Their chemistry is still studied today. Their sketches still played in tributes and classrooms. Harvey Korman had always been a towering presence on the Carol Burnett Show, but by the 7th season, something in him had changed. His moods began to shift without warning. People on set noticed the tension, especially the guest stars. That week, it was Tim Conway and Petula Clark. Conway, who always brought joy to the room, got cut down mid-rehearsal. Korman called one of his sketches stupid and didn't even try to hide it. Clark barely got a polite hello. Things got worse when Korman mumbled something cruel under his breath while rehearsing with both of them. The show had built a reputation for laughter and warmth, but in those moments, the air grew cold. Carol Burnett, known for her kindness and grace, finally had enough. She walked straight into Harvey's dressing room and told him that his behavior was out of line. She didn't yell. She didn't insult. But she was firm. What she didn't expect was the blast of anger in return. Harvey told her to stay out of his business. He even said he'd rather quit after that night's show. When she tried to hold her ground, he physically forced her into the hallway and slammed the door. Carol was stunned. They had worked together for years. That moment shook her deeply. Carol wasn't someone who enjoyed conflict. She had always avoided it. But now, she needed strength. So she imagined herself as someone else. In her mind, she became Joan Crawford and Barbara Stanwyck. Tough, sharp, unbreakable. With their voices in her head, she stood tall, walked back to his door, and this time she didn't hesitate. She told Korman that she had already called his agent. He was fired. He wouldn't be coming back. Harvey didn't believe her at first, but when he saw her eyes, when he heard her steady tone, he knew it was real. For a moment, the fight left him. He began to feel the weight of what he had done. The outbursts, the coldness, the missed chances to show grace. Suddenly, it all caught up with him. And in that moment, he apologized. He asked for one more chance, 1 week, a full week of rehearsals and tapings without a single outburst. Carol said yes, but only if he stayed cheerful the whole time. And he did. he kept that promise. Not just that week, but until the end of the show's run. They stayed close for the rest of his life. When Harvey Korman passed away in 2008, Carol Burnett didn't remember the shouting or the slammed doors. She remembered the friendship that came after. She believed that confrontation saved not just their bond, but the show itself. Behind the scenes, Carol Burnett had her own battles. Her eldest daughter, Carrie, started using drugs at just 13. It wasn't a quiet struggle. Carrie tried everything: alcohol, marijuana, heroin, cocaine, and quaaludes. By 15, she was already in her third rehab. Carol and Joe Hamilton were doing everything they could, but nothing seemed to work. In 1979, the press found out. People magazine called it Carol Burnett's Nightmare. It wasn't a headline. It was the truth. Carol later said those years felt like walking through fire with no way out. But somehow, Carrie made it through. She got clean. She stayed sober for more than 12 years. She visited schools. She spoke to others about addiction. She turned her pain into a path for others to follow. The weight of those struggles took a toll. Carol and Joe Hamilton, married since 1963, began to drift apart. By 1982, they were living separately. The stress of Carrie's addiction, along with the endless work hours, pushed them to the edge. Carol had always been the one who tried to make things better without causing conflict. But this time, there was no easy fix. In 1984, they divorced. The breakup of their marriage, once so full of creativity and success, became another heartbreak in a growing list. 7 years later, in 1991, Joe Hamilton died. He was just 62. The cancer had spread through his head and neck. The man who had built television history alongside Carol died quietly at home. Despite the divorce, they had stayed in touch, especially for the kids. Joe had been a genius behind the scenes. 20 Emmy nominations, 5 Emmy wins. But his final years were marked by personal loss, addiction, divorce, illness. His death left a hole in both their family and the world of television. Then came the greatest blow of all. On January 20, 2002, Carrie Hamilton died. She was only 38. After years of sobriety and hope, cancer took hold. It began in her lungs, then spread to her brain. Pneumonia set in. And just like that, the girl who had survived addiction, who had found her voice, was gone. At the time, Carrie was working on a Broadway play with her mother. It was called Hollywood Arms. Even as her health failed, she kept writing. She kept dreaming. Carol later said losing Carrie felt like being cut in half. But she also said that Carrie's strength, her choice to fight, to recover, to create, remained with her every day. In 1988, years before the cancer, mother and daughter had taken a journey few expected. They went to Moscow. Their goal was clear: help launch the first Alcoholics Anonymous group in the Soviet Union. At the time, the country had over 4 million registered alcoholics. Most had never heard of AA. Carrie and Carol spent hours answering phone calls from people who didn't know where else to turn. Soviet TV aired Carol's film, Life of the Party, to more than 90 million viewers. It was a quiet revolution. Carrie, still early in her recovery, told those callers they weren't alone. Her voice, once shaped by pain, had become a lifeline for strangers across the world. During the early 1980s, two of television's most beloved comedy stars quietly drifted apart. Carol Burnett and Vicki Lawrence had shared years of laughter on screen. Their bond seemed unbreakable. But when Mama's Family spun off into its own show, something shifted. Carol had just gone through a painful divorce from Joe Hamilton, who had not only been her husband, but also the producer of both The Carol Burnett Show and Mama's Family. That breakup didn't just end a marriage, it created emotional lines that no one saw coming. Carol pulled away from the show, and the people connected to it, including Vicky. Burnett had created the character of Eunice, and her presence had helped launch the series. But after the divorce, she vanished from the set. She didn't appear in any future episodes. According to Vicky's own autobiography, the silence between them wasn't temporary. Carol was hurt that Vicky had continued with the series, now controlled by Hamilton. The show moved into syndication. Vicky stayed with it, and Carol stayed away. What had once been a close friendship turned cold. Burnett, once a frequent visitor on set, was now just a memory. Fans were confused. The cast felt the loss. And Vicky was left in a strange position, loyal to the work, but separated from a friend she deeply admired. Carol's decision wasn't just about one show. It was about everything. After the divorce was announced on October 22, 1982, she stepped away from Hollywood almost completely. She moved to Maui. She avoided the spotlight. Those who had worked with her for years found themselves cut off. Vicky later said, "She divorced all of us who were involved with him at all." And that included her. The pain was that deep. Carol stayed silent for years. Even as people asked about her, she gave no public answers. The wound was still open. It wasn't until after Joe Hamilton passed away in 1991 that the first signs of healing began to show. One of the most emotional moments during that silence came with a simple phone call. Vicky was cooking dinner when the phone rang. Her son picked it up. It was Carol. But she didn't want to talk to Vicky. She asked to speak to her husband, Al Schultz. Vicky stood there, stunned. She asked her son, "Does she want to talk to me?" And the answer came back, "No." That memory stayed with her for years. After Al took the call, he told Vicky what Carol had said. "I promise I'll be back. I promise." But it would be a long time before that promise became real. For years, Carol stayed away, wrapped in her own pain. And Vicky tried to move forward, still carrying the sting of that moment. But time can change things. And eventually, it did. After Hamilton's death, Carol and Vicky slowly began to reconnect. The distance shrank. The warmth returned. By 2023, they were not only speaking again, they were close. Vicky said they were closer than we ever have been, really. She said it felt like full circle when they reunited for Apple TV Plus Palm Royale. Their friendship wasn't just restored, it was stronger. Vicky shared that she had learned a lot from Carol over the years. Lessons about work, about fun, about how to keep going, even when things fall apart. That old phone promise, "I'll be back," had finally come true. Carol Burnett's return to television has been nothing short of remarkable. At 91, she's taken on roles that most actors her age wouldn't dare touch. In 2022, she joined the final season of Better Call Saul. Her character, Marion, played a key role in Saul Goodman's downfall. She wasn't there as a nostalgic guest star. She was central to the story. Then, in 2024, she stepped back into comedy as Norma Delacorte in Palm Royale, sharing scenes with younger stars and holding her own with ease. When asked why she still works, she said it's simple. She wants to have fun. That same spirit that lit up living rooms for decades hasn't faded. And she has no plans to stop unless the work stops being joyful.